My name is John Jones. I'm 31 years old, and I own a small used bookstore in a quiet town in Oregon. For 2 years, I've been in love with my best friend Clara, and I've never said a word about it because I couldn't afford to lose her. On New Year's Eve, she looked me in the eye and said, "I dare you to kiss me at midnight." And the whole room laughed like it was nothing but a joke. I kissed her anyway, and nothing was ever the same after that. The shop is called Thornwood Books. It sits on a narrow street 3 blocks from the river, wedged between a closed hardware store and a small bakery that is opened at 6 every morning for 20 years. I live in the apartment above it, a 2 room space with a kitchenette and a window that looks out over the street instead of the water. I wake up at 7, make coffee, and unlock the front door by 9. The bell above the door is brass and worn thin from 30 years of customers pulling it open. It was my father's shop before it was mine. I've worked in this shop since I was 16, first after school, and then full time when my father got too sick to climb the stairs. He passed away 5 years ago, and the shop became mine. I don't know how to do anything else, and I don't want to. The wooden floors creak in specific places, and I've memorized every sound. The third step from the top of the stairs groans when the temperature drops. The radiator in the poetry section hisses at 4 in the afternoon like clockwork. These are the things I know and the things I trust. Most days the store is quiet. People come in looking for specific things, and I help them find what they need. I know where every title sits because I shelved most of them myself. The fiction section is in the back, near the window where the afternoon light comes through the glass and turns the dust into something that looks almost alive. I like that kind of light. It makes the silence feel less empty. I eat lunch at the small desk behind the register, a sandwich from the bakery, usually, or soup from a can when the weather is cold. Then I shelve returns, sweep the floors, and close at 7. I eat dinner alone, read until my eyes get tired, and fall asleep to the sound of cars on the street below my window. It isn't a dramatic loneliness. It's simply the shape my life has taken, and I've grown used to it. But there are moments when the shop feels too big for one person. It happens in the winter, when the dark comes early and the heater in the back room makes a clicking sound that reminds me no one else is there. Or it happens when I find a book I know someone would love and there's no one to give it to. Those moments don't last long. I've learned to move through them the way I move through everything else, one step at a time, keeping my hands busy until the feeling passes. I don't talk about those moments to anyone. I didn't always live this way. 2 years ago, I was with a woman named Rebecca. She was kind and patient, and she liked the shop well enough. But she wanted a life I couldn't give her, one with dinners out and weekend trips and a house in the suburbs with a lawn. I didn't blame her when she left. I blamed myself for not wanting those things enough to try harder. After she was gone, I stopped inviting people over and stopped expecting the phone to ring. The quiet became my companion, and I stopped fighting it. My mother calls once a week from Portland to ask if I'm eating well and if I've met anyone. I tell her I'm fine and that the shop keeps me busy. She doesn't push anymore. She stopped pushing 6 months ago, and part of me is grateful while another part wishes she would try one more time. But I don't say that. I keep those thoughts to myself the way I keep everything else folded up and put away where no one can see them. The shop was enough to keep me busy. The books were enough to keep me company. It wasn't the life I imagined when I was younger, but it was the life I'd built, and I'd learned not to ask for more than what was in front of me. I believed that was enough. I believed it until the day Clara Bennett walked through my door. She came in on a Tuesday afternoon in March. The rain had been falling for 3 days, and the street outside was dark with it. She pushed the door open and the bell rang, and I looked up from the register to see a woman in a blue coat shaking water from her hair. She was looking for a poetry collection by a writer named Margaret Atwood that had been out of print for 30 years. I told her I had a copy in the back. I found it on the shelf where I'd put it 2 years before, and I brought it to the counter. She opened it right there and read the first page without looking up. Her hair was the color of dark honey, and she had a small scar above her left eyebrow that I noticed because she was standing close enough for me to see it. She didn't look like she belonged in my shop. She looked like she belonged in a city, somewhere with noise and movement and people who knew how to dress well. But she kept reading, and I didn't interrupt her. I've always believed that people should be allowed to finish what they start. She bought the book. She came back the following Saturday for something else, and then again the Saturday after that. Eventually, she stopped coming only on Saturdays. She would drop by after work with coffee from the place around the corner, and we'd sit behind the register and talk about whatever she was reading. She worked as an interior designer for a small firm downtown, which meant she spent her days choosing fabrics and paint colors for people who had more money than taste. She made me laugh in a way I'd forgotten I could. I noticed things about her that I didn't want to notice. I noticed the way her hands moved when she talked about a book she loved, like she was sculpting the words out of air. I noticed the way she tilted her head when she was thinking, so the light caught the scar above her eyebrow and turned it silver. I noticed the smell of her shampoo, which was something clean and simple that reminded me of the ocean, even though we were 200 miles from the coast. I told myself these were just observations. I told myself a man can notice things about a friend without it meaning anything more. But I was lying. I knew I was lying every time she touched my arm when she made a point, or every time she stayed until closing and helped me lock up. I knew it when I started shelving the poetry section more carefully, just in case she asked about something new. I knew it when I found myself listening for the bell above the door, even when I was upstairs in my apartment, hoping it was her. I'd been in love with her for 2 years without saying a word, because losing her would have cost me everything I had. She was the only person who made the quiet feel like something I wanted instead of something I'd settled for. Then Marcus called. He was throwing a New Year's Eve party at his loft downtown, and he wanted both of us there. I almost said no. Crowds exhaust me. The thought of standing in a room full of people I didn't know, making small talk while music played too loud, was enough to make me want to stay home with a book and a cup of tea. But Clara said she'd be there, and she told me she wanted me to come. I didn't know how to say no to her without telling her why. That Friday night, I put on a clean shirt and took the bus downtown. The streets were already busy with people heading to restaurants and bars, wearing clothes that cost more than I made in a week. I kept my hands in my pockets and looked at the sidewalk. I've never been good at moving through crowds. They make me feel like a rock in a river, something that doesn't belong and only gets in the way. Marcus's loft was on the fourth floor of a converted warehouse near the river. I could hear the music before I reached the door, something with a heavy beat that vibrated through the floorboards. When I walked in, the heat hit me first. There were too many bodies, too much talking, and the smell of alcohol and perfume mixed together into something thick and cloying. Fairy lights were strung across the ceiling in loops, and the windows were fogged over from the warmth inside. I stood near the door for a moment, wondering if I should turn around and go home. Then I felt a hand on my arm. I turned, and Clara was standing there in a dark green dress I'd never seen before. Her hair was down, falling past her shoulders in waves, and she was wearing small gold earrings that caught the light when she moved her head. She smiled at me, and the room felt smaller and warmer in a way that had nothing to do with the heating. She didn't let go of my arm, and she said she was glad I came. I told her I was too, and for once I wasn't lying. She stayed close to me the whole night. She introduced me to people whose names I forgot immediately, and she laughed when I gave one-word answers to their questions about the shop. She brought me a drink that tasted like berries and something stronger, and she held my hand when we crossed the room to get more. I don't remember what Marcus and I talked about when he pulled me aside. I was watching Clara across the room, watching the way she laughed with her head thrown back, the way the light turned her hair red where it touched her shoulders. At one point, she caught me looking. I expected her to look away or to make a joke about me staring, but she didn't. She held my gaze for a long moment, and something in her smile changed. It wasn't the friendly smile she gave everyone else. The smile she gave me was smaller and quieter, and it made my hands go cold. I didn't know what it meant, and I didn't know if I wanted to know, but I couldn't look away. Marcus had pushed the furniture against the walls to make room for dancing, and people were moving in a way that looked like joy but felt like chaos to me. A woman in a silver dress bumped into me and apologized with a laugh that showed too many teeth. The air smelled of spilled wine and cheap candles. I found a corner near the bookshelf Marcus had built into the wall, and I stood there with my drink, watching the room the way I watched the shop from behind the register. I watched from a distance, and I watched from safety. Clara found me there 20 minutes later. She had taken off her shoes, and she was carrying them in one hand while the other held a fresh drink. She said my name in a way that made me turn toward her before I realized I was doing it. She said I looked miserable. I told her I wasn't miserable. I was just out of practice. She laughed, and the sound of it cut through the noise better than anything else in the room. She took my hand again. She said she wouldn't let me hide in the corner all night. I told her I wasn't hiding. She raised one eyebrow, and I smiled in spite of myself. The clock on the television said 10:30, and there were 2.5 hours until midnight. The room was getting louder, and the fairy lights were blurring at the edges of my vision. I should have been uncomfortable, and I should have been counting the minutes until I could leave. But Clara was still holding my hand, and I didn't want to be anywhere else. Someone suggested a drinking game around 11. A group of us sat in a circle on the floor, passing a bottle that had been emptied and washed out for spinning. The rules were simple. The bottle stopped on you, and you picked truth or dare. Most people chose truth because the dares were getting wilder as the alcohol disappeared. I sat between Clara and a man I didn't know, watching the bottle turn and hoping it wouldn't land on me. It did anyway. Marcus asked me the question, truth or dare, and I picked dare without thinking. The truth was too dangerous. If someone asked me who I was in love with, I wouldn't have been able to lie well enough to convince them. I wasn't good at lying. I wasn't good at much except shelving books and keeping my mouth shut. Clara leaned in before Marcus could think of something. She was close enough that I could smell the berry drink on her breath and see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. She leaned closer and said it, steady and smiling, I dare you to kiss me at midnight. Her voice was flat and her mouth was smiling, but her eyes were doing something else. I couldn't name what it was then, and I still can't put words to it. The room erupted with noise as someone cheered and someone whistled. Marcus laughed and slapped my shoulder, saying, "Oh, he'll never do it." And the others joined in like it was the funniest thing they'd heard all night. I froze and looked at Clara, waiting for her to laugh and say she was joking, waiting for her to take it back and turn it into something harmless. She didn't laugh. She held my gaze for 1 second longer than the joke should have lasted, and then she turned away and picked up her drink like nothing had happened. The game continued. The bottle spun and stopped and spun again, and people answered questions I didn't hear and accepted dares I didn't see. I sat on the floor with my hands wrapped around a cup of warm soda, and I couldn't focus on anything except the sound of Clara's voice 2 feet away from me. I didn't know if she was serious. I didn't know if it had been a joke or if she was testing me or if she had simply said the first thing that came into her head without thinking about what it would do to me. I watched her across the room. She was talking to Marcus, her head tilted in that way I knew so well, and every so often she would glance at me. They weren't the casual glances people make when they're aware of someone in a room. These were longer and more deliberate, and they landed on me like weights. When our eyes met, she didn't look away. She smiled, and it was the same small, quiet smile from before, the one that made my hands cold. I tried to act normal. I answered when people spoke to me, and I laughed when the moment called for it. But my hands wouldn't stay still. I kept turning my cup in circles on the floor, watching the liquid move inside it like a tide I couldn't control. Marcus asked me what was wrong. I told him nothing. It was the loudest lie I'd ever told. He looked at me for a moment, then shrugged and went back to the game. I was grateful he didn't press. I wasn't sure I could have held the truth inside me for one more question. Between her dare and the countdown, I watched her for an hour without knowing I was doing it. Every time she moved across the room, my eyes followed her. Every time she laughed, I tried to figure out if the laugh was real or if she was performing the same way I was performing my calm. I drank 2 glasses of water and 1 cup of coffee I found in Marcus's kitchen, trying to clear my head. It didn't work. My thoughts kept returning to the moment she leaned in and spoke the dare, the way her voice had dropped and her eyes had held mine for 1 second too long. A joke doesn't last 1 second too long because it ends when the laughter starts. But she had held my gaze while the room laughed around us, and that was the part I couldn't stop thinking about. By 11:45, the room had turned into a countdown. People were gathering near the television where a news channel was showing the ball drop in Times Square. The noise was getting louder, and the air was thicker, and I could feel my pulse in my throat in a way that made me aware of my own body. I looked for Clara, and I found her near the balcony door, away from the crowd, looking out at the city lights below. She was alone. I didn't know if she had gone there to get away from the noise, or if she had gone there because she knew I would find her. I crossed the room toward her. People were pushing past me, laughing and shouting numbers I didn't understand. My shirt was sticking to my back, and my mouth was dry. I stopped 3 feet from her and waited for her to turn around. She didn't turn around. She kept looking out at the dark water of the river and the lights from the buildings on the other side that turned the sky orange instead of black. The glass door was cold against her shoulder, and I could see the fog from her breath on the surface of it. "You're going to chicken out," she said. She didn't turn around. Her voice was soft, but I heard it over the noise behind us. It wasn't a question. It was a statement delivered in the same tone she used when she told me a book was overrated or a color wouldn't work in a room. She spoke with a certainty I recognized. It was flat, like she already knew the answer. "I never chicken out," I said. My voice sounded rough, like I hadn't used it in days. It was a lie. I chickened out every day. I chickened out every time I wanted to tell her how I felt and chose to talk about the weather instead. I chickened out every Saturday when she left the shop and I watched her go without asking her to stay. She turned then. Her eyes were bright and her cheeks were flushed from the heat or the drink or something else I couldn't name. "I haven't seen you take a real risk," she said. "Not once in 2 years." Her hand was still on the door behind her, and her fingers were spread wide against the glass. I could see the prints they left when she pulled them away. I opened my mouth to argue, but the words wouldn't come. She was right. I'd told myself it was respect, and I'd told myself it was friendship. But standing there in the heat of that room, 3 feet from her and still not touching her, I knew it was only fear. I was afraid of losing the one good thing I had, and my fear had made me smaller than I wanted to be. It had made me a man who watched instead of acted, who hoped instead of asked. I wanted to tell her that I was tired of being careful. I wanted to tell her that the shop felt empty on the days she didn't come by, and that I had read the same page of the same book 3 times last Tuesday because I couldn't stop thinking about the way she laughed at something Marcus had said. I wanted to tell her that I kept the poetry section neat for her and that I had learned the names of every interior designer in Portland just so I could follow the conversations she had about work. But none of those words would come. They were stuck behind the same wall they had been stuck behind for 2 years. And I didn't know if one kiss could tear it down or if it would only make the wall thicker. The countdown started on the television. The voice said 10, and the room went wild behind us. It said 9, and I looked at Clara's mouth. Her lips were slightly parted, and the gloss on them caught the light from the television screen. It said 8, and I looked at her eyes. They were wide and dark, and she wasn't blinking. When the voice reached 7, she turned to face me fully. Her back was against the glass door, and she was holding her shoes in one hand the way she had when she found me in the corner. At 6, she dropped the shoes. They landed on the floor with a soft sound I heard even over the counting. By 5, her free hand had moved to my chest, and she pressed her palm flat against my shirt. I could feel the heat of it through the fabric. The voice said 4, and I could feel her breath on my chin. Her breath was warm and smelled like berries and something sweeter. The voice said 3, and I moved closer. The space between us shrank to nothing. My hands found her waist, and I could feel the thin fabric of her dress under my fingers. When the voice reached 2, she whispered something I almost didn't hear. You don't have to. But her hand was on my chest, and she wasn't pulling away. She wasn't moving at all, and she was waiting with her eyes wide and her lips parted, and I could see the fear in her face that matched the fear in mine. She was as scared as I was. That knowledge hit me harder than anything else that night. She was scared, and she was still standing there. Then the voice said 1, and I kissed her. I stepped back. The room is cheering, but the sound is far away like a radio playing in another building. She is staring at me. Her eyes are wide and dark, and her lips are slightly parted, and she isn't laughing. She doesn't step back or turn away. She stands there with one hand still pressed against the glass door and the other hanging at her side, and she looks at me like she is seeing me for the first time. I can't breathe. My pulse is hammering in my throat, and my hands are shaking, and I don't know if I should apologize or run or reach for her again. The noise of the party swells around us, people hugging and shouting and spraying something that smells like cheap champagne. Marcus finds us. He looks from me to Clara and back again, and his mouth opens and closes. He starts to say something, then he smiles, a slow, confused smile, and he shakes his head and walks away. I don't blame him, and I wouldn't know what to say either. Clara takes my hand. Her fingers are cold, and they thread through mine with a certainty that surprises me. She pulls me toward the balcony door, and I follow her because I don't know what else to do. The cold air hits my face like a slap, and the city lights below are blurred by the fog that has rolled in from the river. She closes the door behind us, and the noise drops to a muffled thump. We are alone on a small concrete balcony, 4 stories above the water. She turns to me. Her dress is thin, and she is shivering, but she doesn't move to go inside. She looks at my mouth, then at my eyes, and she whispers, I didn't think you would do it. Her voice is small and raw, and it sounds like the truth. I didn't think you'd let me, I say. My voice isn't steady. I don't try to make it steady. She shakes her head. I didn't let you, I wanted you to. She takes a breath that shudders in her chest. I've wanted you to for 2 years, and I was too scared to say it. The dare was the only way I could think of to get close enough without risking everything. The words hit me like the cold air, sharp and impossible to ignore. She had wanted me for 2 years. While I was shelving books and watching her leave and telling myself that wanting was enough, she had been standing on the other side of the same door, too scared to knock. I reach for her hand, and she gives it to me without hesitation. Her fingers fit into mine the way they always have, but now there is no space between us, no careful distance, no pretending. I loved you from the first Saturday, she says. The way you handled the books, like they were alive. The way you didn't try to impress me. I kept coming back for the poetry at first, and then I kept coming back for you. I was terrified you didn't feel the same way. So I made the dare, and I told myself that if you laughed it off, I'd laugh too, and no one would ever know how much it cost me. I pull her closer, and I don't kiss her again, even though every part of me wants to. I just hold her and I feel her shivering against me. And I know it isn't only the cold. I loved you from the Tuesday in March, I say into her hair. The rain, the blue coat, the way you read that first page without looking up. I've loved you every day since, and I never said a word because I couldn't afford to lose you. She pulls back just far enough to look at my face. Her eyes are wet, but she is smiling. You didn't lose me, she says. You found me. We stayed on the balcony until our fingers went numb from the cold. She talked about the first time she noticed me, the way I had looked up from the register when the bell rang, and how my expression had been so open and unguarded that she had wanted to know what I was thinking. I talked about the Saturdays and the coffee and the way she rearranged my display windows without asking permission. We laughed about things that hadn't been funny before, and we held each other between the sentences like we were afraid the other person would disappear. When we went back inside, the party was winding down. Marcus raised an eyebrow at us from across the room, but he didn't say anything. He just smiled and raised his glass. I didn't know what time it was, and I didn't care. Clara found her shoes near the balcony door and carried them in one hand while she held my hand with the other. She said she'd see me at the shop tomorrow, and she told me she wanted to help with the window display. I told her she could rearrange anything she wanted, and she laughed in a way that made the whole room feel brighter. I walked home alone because she had taken a cab with friends, and the night air was sharp enough to clear my head. But my head didn't need clearing. For the first time in 2 years, my thoughts weren't tangled and careful. They were simple. She loved me. I loved her. The quiet in my life had never been enough. It had only been what I settled for because I was too afraid to ask for more. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if we would last a month or a year or the rest of our lives. But for the first time since Rebecca left, I wasn't afraid of the future. I wasn't afraid of wanting something more than the quiet. The shop would still be there. The books would still need shelving. But now there would be 2 cups of coffee on the register on Saturday mornings and someone to argue with about whether a display looked better with blue or green, and a hand to hold when the winter dark came early. It wasn't everything, but it was enough, and in that moment it was more than enough. The next morning, I unlocked the shop at 9, same as always. The bell rang, and the light came through the window, and the dust turned gold in the afternoon. But something was different. There was a text on my phone from her sent at 8 in the morning saying she was bringing coffee and that she had found a poetry book she thought I'd like. I read it 3 times. I put the phone on the register and looked around the shop at the narrow aisles and the worn floors and the shelves I knew by heart. They were the same, but I wasn't. On the shelf behind the register, the Margaret Atwood collection she had come in for 2 years ago was still sitting where I had placed it after she finished reading it. I took it down and held it in my hands. The pages were soft from her fingers, and the spine was creased where she had bent it back to read. I opened to the first page, the same page she had stood at the counter and read while the rain fell outside. I read the lines she had read, and I understood them differently now. I put the book on the counter where she would see it when she walked in. Then I unlocked the door and waited for the bell to ring. I stood behind the registers as the morning light turned the dust to gold, and I waited for the bell above the door. I didn't know what the next chapter would bring, but I knew the quiet would never swallow me whole again.